So the trial is underway. 5 witnesses gets called for the prosecution. No witnesses for the defense. How long did the trial last?
It lasted about 2.5 weeks, as I recall.
Okay. How was Bill Cosby during this process?
Well, this was a horrible experience for Bill Cosby. I mean, who wants to go through something like this?
Twice.
Twice. He's a man in his 80s. You know, you're looking at prison. You're looking at false accusations that you know are not true. And you're looking at a movement surrounding the courthouse with protesters, you know, supporting Me Too, supporting the prosecution. You look at the way politics have inserted themselves into your life and into your legal rights. I mean, anyone would be horribly upset, but he always conducted himself with dignity, always conducted himself with poise and character, and he always believed in himself, and he was a man of real sturdy character. That I have to say that.
But I can imagine he was pretty stressed out.
Well, anybody would be. He didn't show it.
He didn't show it at all.
Mr. Cosby was a very, very strong, determined, principled person throughout my experience with him in this case.
So the trial finally ends. The jury took 2 days to deliberate, and they came back with a
By the way, we
guilty
called a witness in that case.
Oh, you did call a witness?
We did.
Who did you call?
We called a woman from Temple University. You can read her testimony. It's very important.
Okay, can you say what it was?
I don't want to describe. I want to paraphrase what she said, but you can read her.
But it was for Bill Cosby's behalf.
And we called some other witnesses too.
Aha. Who are the other witnesses?
Check the record. You
Check
can
the
see
record.
what they said.
Okay. Well, the jury deliberates for 2 days, and they come back with a guilty verdict. When you heard that guilty verdict, what'd you think?
I was very upset because I knew the trial had been unfair. I knew this judge had not been a neutral arbiter like a judge is supposed to be. I knew he had let prejudicial testimony in that never should have entered that courtroom. I knew the deposition didn't belong in that trial. And I knew Mr. Cosby had been denied his rights repeatedly throughout the trial I was in. As I said before, he wouldn't allow a hearing on statute of limitations to see if he even had the power to conduct the trial. He upped the number of unrelated accusers from 1 to 5. He made statements and, in my opinion, facial expressions throughout the trial that were, my opinion, were inappropriate. We made a very strong record about how he was conducting himself. But knowing that Mr. Cosby had to face prison, had to face appeals, I felt terrible for him. I really did.
Right. Because, for example, this was a recent case, completely unrelated, because you mentioned facial expressions and everything else like that. There was a guy named Arab who was a regular guest on our show. He recently got sentenced to 45 years in prison. And during the sentencing, the judge made a comment about how, you're basically rolling your eyes, your hands are crossed, you're acting disrespectfully as I'm reading this. It doesn't seem like you really regret any of your actions. So I'm going to give you the maximum of 45 years. So if a judge feels some sort of personal snub, they could really end up screwing you.
Well, after Mr. Cosby was found guilty in the second trial, he brought in a new team for sentencing.
Yeah.
And I wasn't there for the sentencing, but I certainly followed it. And if you look at the reporting on the sentencing, you'll see that the trial judge began with some type of statement that seemed totally rehearsed to me. Okay, Mr. Cosby, the time has come, something like that. I can envision this trial judge rehearsing that for weeks. This was not a fair trial, and he got an awful treatment by a justice system that's supposed to be a lot better than this. And I think that was the gist of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court's decision. Our legal system was supposed to be better than what they saw in the Cosby prosecution. They saw politics. They saw disrespecting what a prior DA had done. They saw the introduction of evidence that was highly inflammatory and improper. They saw all kinds of manipulation for selfish reasons. Mm-hmm. And basically they said this was a bait and switch, which is, think about it. Think about looking at the legal system, the way this was conducted, and having the Supreme Court say this was just a bait and switch, like it was a hustle.
Right.
He was hustled.
Yeah.
That's basically what they said.
If you get offered immunity and you take that offer and say what you have to say, and then they come back and say, oh, never mind, that immunity doesn't count, then no one would take an immunity agreement.
Of course not. And the
Yeah.
system would break down.
It'd break down the whole system, yeah.
Because you can't try every case. I mean, 90+% of cases nationwide are resolved before a trial.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have the courtrooms and the personnel to try every single case. So this is, plea bargaining, the kinds of agreements that result in a non-prosecution, they are very critical to the survival of the justice system. And in my opinion, the trial judge and the DA in Bill Cosby's case made a complete mockery of just very fundamental principles of due process and fundamental fairness in the system. And the Pennsylvania Supreme Court did something a lot of people don't see very often. They said, look, the principle of fundamental fairness under our Constitution was violated. We're going to vacate the conviction. We're going to throw this case out, and it can never be reprosecuted. There can be no retrial, is what they said.
Well, Bill Cosby was found guilty on 3 counts of aggravated indecent assault, right? And I guess before the actual sentencing, and this is something that Scott Ross talked about, I brought him in for an interview, which was your one of your private investigators.
Yes.
He said that one of the things that he thinks kind of swayed the judge a bit was that after Bill Cosby was found guilty, Cosby's wife made a statement bashing the judge.
I'm not going to comment on that.
Okay.
Mrs. Cosby, this is a free country. She had a right to express her opinion on the trial.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be critical of Mrs. Cosby for 1 second on that. She was furious at the way this thing was conducted.
Mm-hmm.
She was livid at the injustice. She was right. And the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, in my opinion, has vindicated Mrs. Cosby and Mr. Cosby.